I have spent 3 decades watching the slow, grinding machinery of American power project itself across the globe. For 30 years, I have studied the precise moment when a tactical shift turns into a strategic collapse. I have seen empires overextend, and I have seen the exact point where a wall of steel becomes a graveyard of rusted iron. Most people think this war is a stalemate, a frozen line of trenches and mud that hasn't moved in months. The reality is far more devastating. While the world was looking at the ground, the Pentagon was looking at the clock. They weren't waiting for a breakthrough. They were waiting for the deletion of distance. That is exactly what happened this week. On May 5th and 6th, 2026, the U.S. State Department quietly greenlit a massive $373.6 million long-range precision package. We aren't just talking about more ammo. We are talking about 300-plus long-range systems and over 1,200 JDAM-ER kits designed to reach out and touch targets that, until 48 hours ago, Moscow thought were untouchable. The consequences will be felt for the next decade. What was decided in these last few hours at the Pentagon will reshape the entire Eastern European theater and, quite frankly, the future of the American dollar's role in enforced stability. Tonight, I want to walk you through 3 questions the mainstream coverage refuses to answer honestly. First, why did the U.S. wait until May 2026 to authorize this specific 300 threshold? Second, how does Owen's research into the Russian logistics Windpipe prove that their Frontline is now structurally dead? And third, what does this mean for your energy costs and the 401k sitting in your pocket? If this is the analysis you want, subscribe now and stay with me, because the answers will challenge everything you think you know about the red lines of 2026. Stay with me. Why 300 and why now? Here is what actually happened. The $373.6 million package, approved on May 5th, focuses on the JDAM-ER extended range kits. While the media focuses on the dollar amount, I want to be direct about the mathematics of this exchange. These aren't just bombs, they are the smart brains that convert 500-pound and 2,000-pound unguided munitions into GPS-guided floating fortresses that can travel over 40 nautical miles. But the real story is the 300-kilometer ATACMS, Army Tactical Missile System, that have finally been integrated into the Flamingo missile strikes we saw hitting Cheboksary just days ago. From a professional standpoint, this isn't an aid package. It is a surgical removal of the Russian rear. According to Owen's research into the current frontline geometry, Russia has spent the last 6 months building what they call a buffer zone in the Kharkiv and Belgorod sectors. They believed that by pushing 20 miles into Ukrainian territory, they could keep their own supply hubs safe. They were wrong. On May 5th, the world saw the result: a strike on a Russian production facility in Cheboksary, hundreds of miles from the border. This wasn't a drone. This was a high-velocity, precision-guided message. I want to give you a specific data point. The U.S. has now approved the transfer of 1,200 KMU-572 and 332 KMU-556 tail kits. That 300 number in the tail kits is the key. It represents a specific weight class of bunker busters that can penetrate the reinforced concrete of Russian command centers. The mechanism here is simple but brutal. In the past, Ukraine had to fly F-16s or Su-27s dangerously close to the wall of steel, the Russian S-400 anti-air batteries. With these 300 km range assets and the JDAM-ER's standoff capability, Ukraine is now launching from what I call the safe zone, while the Russian front line is left in a death trap. I have seen this pattern before. It's what we call starving the windpipe. You don't have to kill every soldier in a trench, you just have to destroy the bridge, the fuel depot, and the rail line 150 miles behind them. Owen's research confirms that over 70% of Russian supplies in the Donbass now pass through just 4 major choke points. With 300 long-range missiles, those 4 points can be deleted in a single afternoon. But that is not the most consequential dimension. What matters far more is what comes next. Why did the Pentagon finally drop the hammer? And here is where the analysis gets uncomfortable. Most analysts are missing this. The US didn't send these missiles because Ukraine was winning. They sent them because the 3-to-1 production advantage Russia held in artillery was starting to break the back of NATO's patience. For 2 years, Putin has banked on a war of attrition. He believed that even if his equipment was rusty locks, he had more keys than the West had doors. But the strategic logic shifted in early 2026. The Pentagon and the Treasury Department realized that a forever war was starting to bleed the U.S. defense industrial base too thin. They needed a force multiplier. If Ray Dalio's framework tells us anything about this exact moment, it's that we are in the late cycle conflict stage of the debt cycle. When the empire cannot afford to outproduce the enemy in quantity, artillery shells, it must outproduce them in lethality per unit. I want to be direct. This is about the chessboard of Eurasia. By providing 300 km range missiles, the US is forcing China's hand. Beijing has been watching the red lines closely. Every time the US crosses one, whether it was tanks in 2023, F-16s in 2024, or long-range missiles in 2026, and Russia fails to provide a brutal kinetic response, the Great Dragon sees that the Russian bear is caged. If the Kremlin continues this trajectory, the next move would be a total blockade of the Kerch Bridge using the newly delivered JDAM-ER bunker busters. The target? The final pillars of Russian logistics in Crimea. The consequence? The total isolation of 50,000 Russian troops who will have no choice but to surrender or swim. Russia knows this. Putin knows this. This is why we are seeing a desperate rush to recruit another 400,000 men. But as I have argued for years, men without steel ghosts, submarines, and floating fortresses to protect them are just targets. The logic of the 2026 shipment is clear. Stop the war of attrition by making the Russian rearguard useless. And this is where it stops being abstract and starts being about your money and your future specifically. Let me tell you what this means for you specifically. Because when 300 long-range missiles enter a theater, the global energy markets react long before the first explosion. First, let's talk about gas prices. We are already seeing a 45 cents per gallon increase in the geopolitical risk premium. Why? Because Russia's primary response to being caged by long-range missiles isn't just on the battlefield, it's an attack on the global supply chain. In the last 72 hours, we've seen reports of unexplained maintenance at 2 major European gas hubs. The data suggests we are at the same point on the curve as the 1973 oil crisis, a tit-for-tat energy war that will erode your purchasing power by 5 to 8% by the end of the summer if this escalates. In 2022, the dollar was a sanctuary. In 2026, the dollar is a weapon. When we send 300 missiles, we aren't just sending aid. We are spending your future tax revenue to maintain a rules-based order that is getting more expensive by the day. From a China angle, this is the Taiwan calculus. Xi Jinping is watching the Russian frontline vanish. If a few hundred American missiles can delete the logistics of a G20 military, what can they do to a cross-strait invasion fleet? This realization is causing a massive capital flight out of emerging markets and back into safe U.S. defense stocks like Boeing, the primary contractor for this $373 million deal. If this analysis is landing, give this video a like. It is the only signal that tells YouTube to show this to people who need to see the truth behind the headlines. Global fallout isn't just about bombs. It's about the fact that Russia still controls 12% of the world's wheat and a massive portion of the fertilizer market. Owen's research highlights that if the Russian front line truly collapses, the resulting chaos in the Black Sea will send food costs up another 15% globally. We are looking at a shattered harvest scenario where the price of stability is a permanent increase in the cost of living. So here is where this goes, and I am going to be direct. In the next 30 to 60 days, we are going to see one of two things. Scenario A, the escalation. Russia, realizing its front line is gone forever because its rear is being deleted, will attempt a tactical demonstration. This isn't a nuke, it's a massive cyber attack on a NATO windpipe, likely a port in Poland or a data center in Germany. They have to prove they can still hurt the West without crossing the nuclear threshold. Scenario B, the quiet retreat. Based on every historical parallel, from the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan to the US exit from Vietnam, the more probable outcome is a tactical shortening of the line. Russia will abandon the buffer zones they just fought for and retreat to the pre-2022 borders to preserve what is left of their professional officer corps. My analytical opinion? The chessboard has been overturned. Putin is out of pieces, and the US has just handed Ukraine a queen in the form of these 300 long-range systems. Every empire that reached this stage believed it was different. Every single one was wrong. The window between understanding this shift and being caught by the resulting economic fallout is exactly as wide as the time you spend acting on what you now know. I want to leave you with one question. If the front line is truly gone forever, is the West prepared for the chaos of victory that follows a Russian collapse? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every one. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because when this moves, it will move fast. The Reid briefing is concluded.